few weeks ago, we were asked to plan an experiment that demonstrates competition between organisms.
We decided to use two plant species, beans and peas. We wanted to investigate the effect of competition on plant growth.
Our hypothesis was that when plants compete for resources such as minerals and water, those that grow in less crowded conditions will be healthier than those plants that grow in crowded conditions.
In this experiment, we are examining both types of competition, intraspecific competition and interspecific competition. Bean plants competing with each other is intraspecific competition, when members of the same species compete for resources. Bean and pea plants competing with each other is interspecific competition.
How do you remember the difference between intraspecific competition and interspecific competition?
Well, I have a little trick. What I do is I compare competition in nature to team sports in school.
What do you mean?
Well, think about intraspecific competition as intramurals. Intramurals are competitions between students in one school. So intraspecific competition is competition between members of the same species.
Okay, I get it. But what about interspecific competition?
Interspecific competition is like intervarsity competition between two different schools.
So interspecific competition is competition between two different species.
Yeah, you got it.
So how did you set up this experiment?
Well, in pot A we planted one pea seed, and in pot B we planted one bean seed. So pots A and B together make up our control group. Now pots C, D, and E contain 5, 10, and 20 pea seeds respectively. Pots F, G, and H contain 5, 10, and 20 bean seeds respectively. Now pot I contains 10 bean seeds and 10 pea seeds together. So pots C to I form our experimental group.
What's the purpose in having a control group and an experimental group?
Control group is the standard to which we compare the others. In this case, we want to compare the growth of plants where there was no competition, control pots A and B, to the growth of plants where there was competition, the experimental group.
We should also mention the variables in this experiment. The manipulated variable was the amount of seeds we put in each pot. And the fixed or controlled variables were the amount of soil in each pot, 300 grams, the amount of water each pot received, which was 100 milliliters every 2 days, the duration and intensity of light, and a constant temperature of 20 degrees Celsius. These variables were the same for all the pots.
The responding variables in this experiment are plant height and number of leaves. These factors may vary according to density or number of plants in the pot. Another variable we could have measured is the mass of the plant.
We recorded data for the entire 3 weeks. Every 4 days we would measure the plant's height and record the number of leaves on each plant. We would then write that data down in our lab books.
Today is the last day of our experiment. We're going to collect our final data and analyze it to see if it confirms our hypothesis or if we must reject it.
While they do that, let's take another look at this experimental design. In their experiment, Benez and Cam used a control group. This group was used as a standard of comparison. Competition was not a factor in the control group. The experimental group was the group in which competition was a factor. In a scientific experiment, there are 3 types of variables. Manipulated variables, which are the variables that the experimenter deliberately changes, in this case, the number of plants per pot. Fixed or controlled variables are the variables that are kept constant, the space, soil, water, light, and temperature. Responding variables are the measurable responses to the change in the manipulated variables, in this case, the height and number of leaves.
So how's your experiment going?
No, just graphing the data from the experiment now.
Oh, let me see. Oh, this is very interesting data. So what interpretations can you make from this data?
Well, the plants that were in control group when there was no competition was the tallest. Then, when the competition for resources increased, the plant growth decreased.
Oh, very interesting. Anything else?
Yeah, it was the same for number of leaves. The plant in the control group had the highest number of leaves, but as the population per pot increased, the number of leaves per plant decreased.
Oh, so what conclusions can you make from this data now?
Well, competition limits the growth of a population.
In intraspecific competition, the greater the number of plants competing for common resources in a given space, the more their growth will be affected. In the case of interspecific competition, those species that have adaptations that increase their efficiency at using common resources, may have a survival advantage over other species. In this experiment, the individual pea and bean plants in the control group were taller and had more leaves because they were not in direct competition with each other or with members of their own species.